he keeps saying like, oh, I can't wait for someone to come up to me and like say the angry things they say to me, right? And it's like, no, nobody's going to. You are in the body of the most privileged person in society. And so he now is a very good weapon. So that is like the reason, the best way I've ever heard this explained is women couldn't vote themselves the right to vote, right? Like we have to convince
Good point.
the good men to take that up with their male friends. And that is one of the things that like the good men aren't quite doing in numbers yet, is like shutting patriarchy down with their friends. So
yeah, the locker room
you created
talk,
like a sleeper agent that has woken up in your husband. I love that. No, and it's like the
what
white
happens
dudes
when you
for
marry an
Harris.
intelligence officer?
I would love that list of everyone that logged on to that Zoom, the white dudes for Harris, because that's what men need to be doing, is organizing and having conversations with other men as well. And hopefully, Facts, you and I can work together to organize some of that.
yeah, I've been on that mission for a while
It's people like Facts doing stuff like this. So thank you, and I want to give you like credit for all the work you have done for the anti-cult side.
Appreciate that, Daniela. Thank you very much. One of the things that I think is really, really important that we probably don't talk about enough, and Felicia and I have had this conversation from an advertising, from a marketing perspective. Part of the power of the Russian propaganda that infiltrated American media was like these brief, easily remembered phrases like "lock her up," "fuck Joe Biden," "stop the steal," all this kind of stuff. And because the right-wing echo chamber dominates in that sphere, we've got Charlie Kirk and Joe Rogan, there's no pushback. So would you agree that it wasn't necessarily Democratic and or liberal messaging, but just not as many messengers?
It's not as many messengers. It's single channel, like Trump has trained his people to watch Fox News through that being who he communicates with. And so I almost feel like the MAGA has one way to reach their side. We are trying to message everybody, right, and we don't have like one way anymore, which is another thing about technology that has changed actually kind of in cults' favor since our last round with cults. It's now you can be isolated in an echo chamber, but like still operating in the world. But like the only things you're taking in is from your computer screen in your bedroom. And it's all this one sort of thing. And about what you said, the chants, that's called loaded language. And that's like a weaponization of language that cults use. And, say something like that and people just don't even think about it. But at the same time, some fuck Joe Biden, right, has so much more meaning to them. There's all this like vernacular going on in the background as well.
Right. I mean, they talk about some of the most successful marketing strategies throughout history, just do it, where's the beef, those kinds of things. It's all relevant. And I think you called out something that's really, really important. The right knows who their target is, white men, and then by assimilation, white women. Whereas on the left, because it's the good and bad of having a big tent, right? When you've got many different demographics represented under your tent, your messaging is not successful by targeting one group, one member within your community, which makes it a challenge. And like I've always said, we don't want to relent. We're never going to lose the moral argument because we're going to stand in defense of human rights. But to win elections in America, that's not even relevant anymore. I mean, human rights be damned. Price of eggs, gas, hate, BIPOC, attack immigrants. That's what's winning elections. So I don't know what the response is to that, other than there needs to be more people saying it, more groups like Police is establishing, more activism under White Dudes for Harris, that kind of shit.
Yeah, and I don't know who said this quote, but like the response in dark times is good people raising good children. And the way that cults end is when they fail to recruit or keep the next generation. And that's what I think is like a sign of hope here. I'm like, silver lining, there's a millennial in the White House. The only age demographics that went for Trump really were the boomers and higher, right? Like millennials just aren't in power yet. And yeah, young white men are going over there, but the women are the ones that bring the children, right? So if they're not getting young women and children, it doesn't matter how much money you have, Mormon church, it doesn't matter how much power you have, your cult is gonna end eventually, as many celibacy cults have found out. And that's really what happened with the Children of God, the cult that I grew up in too. So, the book I'm writing now is called The Culting of America. Okay, I think we've been on this path for a really long time. And I think like a lot of it is cracking up now. And like you said, it's not like wishing for failure,
Right.
but it's just the way that systems change is either the people at the top agree to change them or the people rise up and like pull down the system and create a new system.
We've talked throughout this morning the parallels to 1930s Germany. And, we can sort of see it. The Lügenpresse, fake news. The demonization and the scapegoating of German and Russian Jews within society. So sadly, history repeating itself. My concern, there's many concerns, but because the Russian propaganda machine is so well funded, and the fact that it infiltrated American media and infiltrated the minds of the electorate, and it worked. It's only going to get worse, or in their minds, better, right? It's only going to be more intense. It's only going to be. So what should we be looking for aside from what we've seen already? Any thoughts on that? Again, put your intelligence officer hat on. You wear many hats, Daniela. You wear many, many hats. But this one now, the intelligence officer hat.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard because of technology. I think that at some point, Gen Z is pretty smart in like sort of moving against technology in some ways, but this is even like my one like thing that I'll really warn people is like when you are doing true resistance activities, right? Like do not use technology because we have the best spy network in the world. And that combined with, like you said, like outside Russians, like at this point we have oligarchs in our country, right? Which is a word that was resurrected for Russian kleptocrats controlling their country. And like we now have these billionaires and they're the ones that own the social media, right? And they're the ones that decide what you see. TikTok is owned by China, who's deciding what we see and what we're allowed to say, right? So
until Elon Musk buys it.
Right. But there needs to be like a lot of awareness about that.
Right.
Another thing to really, really watch out for is the whole point of a cult is to get your labor. And we already see Elon Musk now talking about the Department of whatever government efficiency that people are going to need to be willing to work 80 hours a day. I was already using his stuff at Twitter as the primary example for my chapter on that. Right. But it's like, watch your labor. I always tell people like, watch your labor. What are you getting in return? I think it's excellent that millennials and Gen Z are kind of buying out of the concept that you just work for the man all your life and everything will be fine. And then, another thing to really watch out for is ends justifies the means thinking, right? That whatever is worth it if we don't, if we can beat the other guy, if we can beat the outsider. It's
interesting to watch them forego morality. Like, right, the Republican Party that is so deep is using religion as a control mechanism, and to watch that the line of them try to justify the lack of morality inside their party. I was watching Mike Johnson was being interviewed yesterday on Sunday morning political show. It might have been Jake Tapper who asked him like, this is Mike Johnson, who allegedly is the Christian, the most evangelical of all the Christians.
Seven
and
Mountains
he's like,
guy.
Does morality have a place anymore in the Republican Party? Does it matter if you are moral? And even Mike Johnson, this man who claims to be the most Christian of all the Christians, has to do this tap dance to be like, well, Matt Gaetz is going to drain this, is going to shake up. Well, he's a child, an alleged child sex trafficker is really where we're at, like that. I mean, so it's interesting to watch that disconnect, to watch them try to pretend they're somehow the party of morality while also letting, essayers and criminals into the White House.
I mean, and this is kind of the exact story of the Children of God, which supposedly was like, we're going to win the world for Jesus before the end time, and somehow ended up justifying the rape of children. And it kind of always does come to that because it's always about power, right? So it's just, I don't think that morality matters anymore in the cult. I think that, again, we have to remember that like cults are built,
ends justify the
cults are
means.
built
Yeah.
on purpose in order to manipulate people and get power. And values are weaponized, right? The children of God weaponized love. Enron had honesty engraved in marble in front of their headquarters, like values, Trump weaponizes loyalty, so like values can be weaponized, values are gray. And I describe this in cults as like there's a sacred assumption, and the sacred assumption is always some version of we are right? And then they kind of picked, we're going to be pro-life, pro-morality, pro-family, right, as like their mission, right, which is save the children. But under the sacred assumption of we're right, like we will justify anything. And this is where, again, my like intelligence thing for you is as soon as you consider yourselves the good guys, you're at risk, right? Like you're failing some sort of perspective. The whole heart of intelligence work is you have to divorce yourself from the unit, literally be agnostic, not believing in whether you're good or bad, and like put yourself in the head of these other people as humans so that you can understand like what they're doing to you and why. And so you can kind of like predict that, which is very interesting because then it's called the Cassandra effect. Nobody likes the person that always talks about the bad stuff. But you have to be able to do that if you're going to protect yourself, right? You have to be able to humanize the other side. And this is one of the things when we say cult members or when we say people are brainwashed is we just immediately start like dehumanizing them in our heads. I posted, this was a bad one for me on the left. Like there was a woman who got a silver star for shooting down that were raining down on civilians, and they happened to be in Israel. And so people were like, oh, should have just let it fall. And I'm like, this is ends justifies the means mentality, right? Like people are like, what side are you on? I'm like, I'm on the side of not dropping bombs on human beings. Like we need to be careful on the left as well about dehumanization, about loaded language, right? About like the way we refer to the other side, because that creates and justifies the means mentality.
One of the fascinating parts of this whole thing, and again, Danielle, I know I only have you for a few more minutes, so I appreciate your time, but the ability for the Russian propaganda machine to convince the American electorate that life would be better in Russia. What I mean by that is like the example that Tucker Carlson gave when he went on his, I'm going to get on my knees, the filleting tour of Vladimir Putin, whatever the fuck you want to call it, going to Russian supermarkets, how clean they are. Look, you can always find a place to park. It's so, everything is so cheap. In that society that just has no regard for members of LGBTQIA, locks up the press, locks up dissidents. So the society that is not about freedom at all has convinced the American society who lives in freedom that their way of life is better. That to me is one of the most dangerous parts of this propaganda machine, because we see it all the time, the Putin apologists and the simps for the Russian society. Has that been gradual from what you've seen? Or Felice, I'm curious about both of you. I know, again, Danielle, you've been in this space for a while. It seems like I don't recall that ever happening. I mean, I think about 1980s, war games movies, and Russia was the evil empire, and Ronald Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev to tear down that wall. When did this shift happen that all of a sudden a big chunk of the American electorate are on Team Russia?
I mean, I think a lot of it has happened with Trump and like the same stuff that allowed him to win. But like he's been worshiping Russia from the beginning, and we see this in my book, our cult guru, his heroes were Castro, Gaddafi, and Rasputin.
Wow.
And
Quite a
and
list.
it's like these obvious bad guys, but he was able to take Americans of the 60s and 70s and walk them into such a mindset And I want to go back to what you said about like the Russian life versus the American life. Part of why cults pop up in times of social turmoil is because the world is like very confusing and very scary. And the cult leader just offers clarity, right? So white people in America were convinced to be afraid of like America not being a white country anymore. In part because they've made it so terrible for minorities, but in part because, and I always like to remind people, like the cult and the cult recruiters are manipulating you, right? Like this has been a message. This has been Russia didn't just randomly attack the elections in 2016. Like this has been going on forever, right? We'll let the Americans think they won the Cold War, sure. They don't know what we're doing. And that's part of it too. I just think American exceptionalism is so ingrained in us that this was honestly part of how we lost in Afghanistan, which was just the completely underestimating people who had devoted their entire lives to coming for us, and thinking that we were somehow better because we're high tech, because we're America.
I like what you said about simplicity. I think think about the solutions that Trump offers. Now they're lies, right? Like they're manipulations, it's disinformation and misinformation, but it is simple, right? Elect me, everything's going to be better. Don't worry. You know what I mean? Now imagine, what's the left's alternative? Hey, you might have to read some books. This is complicated. The answers are nuanced. The truth is nuanced, right? Like it's not an easy fix. It's actually going to take time. Now, which sounds better? I mean, it's true. I mean, Trump was raised by authoritarians. Like he was raised at the feet of them. I think that's how you, like you're saying, you end up loving Rasputin and Castro. I was just a great documentary. I think the fourth part just came out on HBO. It's called Breath of Fire. It's about the Kundalini, the Yogi Bhajan cult. Are you aware? And they bastardize Sikhism basically. This is a guy who's making everyone be vegetarian, who's eating McDonald's. So familiar. He's essaying children, I suggest watching Breath of Fire because the parallels are uncanny.
And there's two things about what you were saying. One is anything in the space of personal transformation, right? People think of cults as religious. So like anything in the space of personal transformation, whether that is going to college, right? Religion, self-help, any of this guru stuff, right? Like predators can and will show up. And that's how so many people get recruited in. But then the thing that you said about the easy answer versus the complicated solution, that's a sign. That's a sign we can look for as we're in it and we can protect ourselves against. Anyone giving you a simple solution for a complicated problem wants to con you or wants to cult you. Right? Elon Musk is not taking us to Mars when all of the world's best scientists can't build a functioning ecodome, right? A 19-year-old dropout from Stanford didn't invent amazing blood, testing technology when all the world's best scientists couldn't figure that out. Anyone, I have these lists of the guru gotcha checklist and then my red flags for toxic groups. And at the top of both of them, I have a focus on your own uniqueness, right? Anyone telling you that they are the way, the truth, the life, the only one talking about it, the only one that has this idea, right? Keith Raniere of Nexium just told his people he was the smartest man on earth and was a concert pianist. Gave no proof of either of these two things. He just told them that and they believed him, right? So it really is question more. When it sounds too good to be true, it's not true, right? And just I know it's frustrating, right? Going back to if there was an easy way to get people out of cults, I would be very rich and people would like me much more because the answer is no, we can predict it, we can narrate it, but everyone's crack in the brainwashing is going to be different. And that's what's hard. And honestly, that is because we buy into our own indoctrination, which is why the discontent is so important. Right? All Russia had to do was wait until America was discontent enough. And then they can sneak in and be like, see how much better our life is.
Yeah, I mean,
People here aren't allowed to be discontent.
I think about it from the national security perspective too, because one of the Republican platforms this year was, firing woke Democrats in the military. The moderate getting woke out of the military, and the fact that the right, the self-proclaimed party of active duty, party of patriotism, party of veterans, cheers for that. Again, that's destabilization. That's this demoralization. It's the woke people that serve in their country that can't possibly be tough enough, brave enough, courageous enough to defend us against enemy threats, right? So we've got to replace them. Meanwhile, recruiting's already down. So more Russian propaganda in the mind of the right, thinking that people who, just because their political affiliation, they might lean left, they can't be patriotic enough because Russia told us so,
Right.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, again, remember that like the control is always more important to the cult than the operational success. So that's the real danger here for like the American people, is that for better or for worse, there are a lot of people out there that want to get us, or I should say deserved or undeserved. There are a lot of people out there, and like there's a very real chance that he will weaken the military, right? That he will, because building an army of yes men is not how America built the strongest military, right? It was diversity, it was inclusion of women and Black people back in the 60s when we first were able to mandate that desegregation, right? Like every single one of these things has led to the next one. Like when Trump tried to ban trans service members, it was active duty members that reacted very negatively to that. Because it's really hard to hate up close, right? So once something is being done, right? Like as soon as we got on those teams, those combat teams, which I believe was an experiment intended to fail, like intended to prove what they all knew, that women couldn't hack it. And then like as soon as we got there, it was, thank gosh you're here. We start noticing all these things. We start integrating more things. We learn that having women on the team makes everyone safer. All of these different things. But
could you speak a little more to that?
also-
Because, Pete Hegseth, our new underqualified sec dev, who paid off a woman that he apparently didn't grade. I mean,
Yep.
who knew?
That's quite a few.
Could you see, he wants women out of combat. He seems to be a misogynist. And you just said something very interesting to me, that you found out that actually having women on combat teams was beneficial. Can you speak a little more to that?
Yeah. So it's always been this assumption that like, we've always asked this question: are women good enough to be men? And like that's the question we've tried to make you answer for the first 243 years of like America, right? It was like, are you good enough to be men? Because if not, then you can't be a soldier. This is one of the big apocalypses I think we've had that people don't really realize, is like when the industrial age crashed into the information age, and I think we thought in the industrial age that everyone had to be the same part of a machine for a machine to run smoothly. What we find out in the information age is when everyone's a little different, that creates friction. Friction creates energy. We go farther, right? So like we have done well, right? Like we answered that question in 11 months that they had been discussing for 243 years. As soon as they like put us there. Actually, we answered it in 3 months. And then the generals were like, okay, women on all of the teams, right? Because the actual thing they found out was we're asking the wrong question, right? We're presupposing that men do war the best and that the way we do war is the best because we're at the top. But what we actually found out when we were forced to put women in combat because we were trying to win the hearts and minds of a Muslim population, that, men couldn't search women. So we were like, we should put women in combat. And we immediately proved like everything just completely the opposite. And that the reality here is that when both men and women are trying to unalive you, it makes sense to have both men and women on your side. But you have to have them at the table. You have to empower them to speak up. And all of that has been done very effectively in the military in the past 10 years, because people love to tell me the military is not your social playground. I'm like, actually, the military has always been the place where you can just force the policies. And as soon as you I always say, like, when a group of people can't do something, you don't have to make regulations and legislations to ban them from doing it. And so as soon as you take those things away and you just let these people serve, then you start to see all of the things that their perspective brings to the table. So it's always been like, oh, can you pull a 300-pound man and all of his gear out of combat? But the reality is, maybe I can, maybe I can't, but I can fit through a much smaller hole than you can, Facts, to go open the gate for the whole army, right? Or they can just toss me over a wall, right? Or as I said to the man who got in my face at my book event asking me if I could beat him like a man. And there were 3 generations of Air Force veterans at my back right away. It was like Pappy and Dad and Son. But what old Mike from Southwest didn't know was my stiletto was about 2 seconds away from going through the top of his foot because I was going to beat him like a woman. So my answer to Pete Hogsworth is I've been selling tons of books about being one of the first women in ground combat and all the things that we proved ever since he woke up and decided to say this. But also, if you wanna piss off 20% of Donald Trump's military and like really weaken, because women have been owning it in combat positions for the last decade. You're not just taking them out of operations and sending them back to support. No, they're going to leave in droves. And honestly, I kind of would under a, rapist in chief. As excited as I was that the military was going to get so much better under Kamala, I am, exactly the opposite under Trump and his man who has already been credibly accused of sexual assault. And, at least 1 in 3 of us, 44%, according to the to Wounded Warrior Program's last survey, it's guys like Pete. That are doing it and that are now going to be in charge. But again, if they want to take away half of the perspective, like knitting is Morse code, y'all. They don't even realize that. It really is. And there was very successful spies in World War II called the knitting spies. And the fact that like men will just consistently underestimate us is definitely like our strongest point. So I'm like, you know what? If you want to make Donald Trump's military weaker, I don't know, go right ahead, right? Like you're going to have to go against all of the evidence they've collected, qualitative and numbers, and just be like, nope, we just want to go back to being a man's playground. Like, okay, but one of the things that Hitler did wrong was expecting all the German women to stay home and just have white babies and then discounting all of the women of the resistance.
Yeah, I think the 4B movement in America is going to become like the 64B movement in America. Danielle, this is great. I know you said you had about an hour.
Just follow me, please, and hopefully you'll come on the show we do geared towards women, because I think you're an inspiration. I'd love to hear you speak. I think you bring a light, and sanity to a very dark time, and I've appreciated the conversation.
I agree, and I'm honored that you always spend some time with us. Any last thoughts for cautionary tales or anything for us to keep an eye on, or just in words of encouragement, positivity? What you got for us, friend? Take some water.
My biggest caution is isolation. Isolation always increases extremism. It's not surprising that we see extremism increasing after a pandemic. So like, make sure you're not isolated, right? Question yourself. Go to the little library in front of your house and grab a random book that you would never read. Like, make sure that you're getting more than one perspective and that you're getting information from more things than just like what social media is feeding you. Because that's how they control you the most, right? But as soon as children of God, the beginning of the end, once they started using the internet as a tool to reach people, they also gave us that tool to the outside. Mormons are seeing that right now. Like, information is never bad. So read the banned books, read them to your kids, right? And just like, that's how you resist.
I love that. Would you like to plug your various books?
Yes, so I have a book called Uncultured. You can get that anywhere you buy books. If you buy it through the social media link or follow me and buy it in my shop, I autograph those. It's also on audio. The arts and cults editor of the New York Times, said it was one of his favorite things of last year. And it was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in 5 days. And then I also made a video book of Un-American, which is a second sort of memoir of me looking at power and privilege and whiteness and otherness and trying to understand how 20% of veterans were part of January 6th, etc. And you can get that on my Patreon, which is at Knitting Cult Lady. I also have a YouTube channel where I do a weekly show that's just like the cult report of the week. It's like the John Oliver show, but less funny and all about cults. So come and join me. And I'm every day on TikTok just talking about cults and the culting of America. And thank you so much for having me. And Felice, I'll very much like to be on your show and probably also have you come on my podcast, Cults and the Culting of America.
Danielle, it's always a pleasure, my friend.
Are you the same on YouTube? Are you the same on YouTube? Is it Knitting Cult Lady? Okay, awesome. I'll make sure to follow you there too. Thank you so
It's
much.
always a pleasure. It's so good to see you. Thank you. Be well. That was fascinating. So I think go ahead. Your thoughts on what we just went through there, because that was amazing.
No, I think she's a perfect example. And you know what I really like that she was talking about is that diversity makes us stronger. Like not just our military, like women in combat, but also all races, all creeds, all religions. That's something that Mark Milley was talking about. Like, there's that famous clip when Matt Gaetz was trying to have a gotcha moment with Mark Milley at a congressional hearing and saying, oh, like, what do you know about Marxism? And he's like, I'm not a Marxist, right? But like, I educate myself. I need to understand Marxism. I need to understand white rage. I need to understand authoritarianism. I need to understand all of these things. I need to educate myself on a wide range of topics because my job is to protect Americans, and knowledge is power. You should want to do the same thing. Like diversity makes America stronger. The collective makes America stronger. I think that was a beautiful note she ended on, because the more we isolate, the more we are individuals, the more we don't see the value in all of us, that, what I can bring to the table is not what someone else can bring to the table. And, we are stronger together. And when all voices are heard, that is the future. That is our way back to each other. I'm a Brene Brown fan, if any of you like, quantitative analysis and psychology. And she, it's empathy. It's being able to look at your neighbor, put yourself in their shoes and see their perspective, to empathize with each other, to have these crucial conversations. And that's America's way back to being whole.
It's true, and something just to piggyback on that, the whole the whole isolationism, and it's the lack of diversity that is in the Russian society. By they don't want diversity. They don't support the LGBTQA community. They certainly don't. They don't support the press. They don't support diverse opinions. They don't support opposition, obviously, and that propaganda has made its way to our shores. Similar, like we talked about many times this morning, it's the scapegoating, it's the targeting, it's the fake news, the Lugenpresse. It's like, the trans kids, trans athletes in sports, all that kind of stuff is all part of that propaganda machine, so that the dispossession of white people, so that becomes this another talking point, right? Another pointed argument against diversity. Kamala Harris was a DEI hire. I mean, where do you think that comes from? That comes from this, the preservation of whiteness.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I could not agree. Yeah, and we could talk about that in a second. But I so agree with what you're saying, and I think that's why it's important. Like, what I think we can do on social media, and it's like, what can we all do? It's you can be yourself and you can tell your story, right? We need to humanize ourselves. Right to the right. Like as a pansexual woman, I can explain what that is, or I consider myself a sapiosexual. Like, yeah, hey, I don't love people based on what type of genitals they have, right? Like that's the last thing I think about. I just love people's brains. I'm interested in. I fall in love with people's minds, but the more we humanize ourselves, the more we say, this is who I am. I'm just a person like you. Get to know me, learn about me, see me as a human. Like we need to force the right to see us as humans just like they are. We are your neighbors. We're just trying to survive in a capitalistic society like you. So I think it's those conversations, it's community. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the more we isolate, the more we don't connect with people, the worse the problem becomes.
Yeah, and I think Daniela's message, and maybe if you heard differently, let me know, Felice. But her, when I asked her about how do we combat this, right? It's not easy. It's obviously not easy. It's an uphill fight when we take these truncated. What does she call the three? What does she call that? I forgot what she said. That loaded messaging or something to that effect, right? I forgot what she called it.
Loaded. Oh, I can't
Something
remember
like that.
either.
But the three word, the campaigns again, where's the beef? Lock her up. Just do it from Nike. Stop the steal. Fuck Joe Biden. All those kinds of things by design. That is a strategy that comes from misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda because it's loaded language. Thank you, John. That's by design. So for us to retort or rebut that, what is it? Human rights matters. Of course, human rights matters. Or defend women's rights. Of course, we're going to defend women's rights. It doesn't land the same because it's not rooted in anger. It's not rooted in hatred. It's not an attack on someone. So I think what I learned from that conversation again was brilliant. Danielle's book on culture, by the way, there's a link to it in the link tree in my bio. If you buy it through that, you'll get an autographed copy from her. Was the simplicity of the messaging from the right and how it's been so simple, but yet a tried and true method. You can compare it to Yahtzee Germany through, and then the Crystal Knight going after the marginalized groups, much like this mass deportation. We just got examples of Trump literally saying, "Oh yeah, day one, we're going to go after people." So community, we all have to stick together. It's that simple. Everybody, please keep liking and sharing. Please let's get Felice up over 5K coins, please. I would like to encourage folks to subscribe. If you subscribe to our channel, first of all, to join our Discord, this does not require a subscription. Come on in, join the party. It's great. Subscriber benefits include access to the subscribers only section of our Discord, which gives you not only opportunities for streaming events, for subscriber specials, but you can also get discount on some merch. And we have brand new holiday themed merch. My new favorite merch item is the Regulate Dick, Not Jane. That is available in our merch store.
I have to Andrea, thank you so much for the Venmo. And it says, my name is Carrie. Tell everyone I said to gift you. Thank you for all you do. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Like, we do rely on tips and donations, like to keep my research going, all of the stuff I do. Again, I just want to say, if you're interested in that show, I do a clip show every day. It starts at 11 Pacific.
Do you sleep?
Eastern.
Do you sleep at all?
No, I know I don't. I know the debate at night. Yeah, 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern with Pickles. If you know Pickles, we also debate together sometimes at nights. And then tomorrow, Tuesdays, will be the day when Potty Mouth Pollyanna and Mandy and In Bed with Danielle, Danny and I will be starting our show. The inaugural show will be tomorrow. And then, like we said, we should build a community. And I think we should also say, if there's people who have backgrounds in advertising and marketing, like, we need to do a good old fashioned, like, Mad Men creative sesh. Like, these 3-syllable slogans, you know what I mean? We can make them. We should have different messaging topics and put these out and brand the shit out of them. Sorry.
Yeah, you can say shit. It's okay. You're fine. Something else that Felice and I have been talking about, and I thank you for mentioning that, is that, again, and we touched on this a little bit with Daniela, there's not enough outlets on the left to kind of push back. So we feel and I've gone back and forth, and I don't necessarily think it was the DNC and or left leaning messaging. I just think it's the lack of messengers. And there's a bit of pearl clutching on the left for sure that's been going on forever, but I think it's a good and bad. When you have a big tent, when you have a lot of people in your universe, there's a lot of people's opinions and voices that you're going to hear, and that's a really, really good thing. But to message them directly is difficult because you're going to miss some, which is, again, this goes back to the propaganda machine that the Russians were able to tap into. White boy rage in particular, blue collar workers, who again used to be a core demographic within the Democratic Party, and they said whatever that messaging might be, it's the immigrants are coming for your job, blame the left for inflation, trans kids in schools are indoctrinating your children, which of course we know is just not true, but it worked. And it's hard to come back from that ledge, Felice?
Oh, I know. And that is one of the issues is like once you walk through a door, it's really hard to go backwards. And that is like Danny, Mandy and I were having conversation yesterday, and it's like, yeah, we're going to feel the effects of electing Trump probably for the rest of our natural lives, and our children will. It's like once you ring a bell, how do you unring it?
Pavlov, exactly. Hi, John. Thanks for your patience. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Fax, Felice. Firstly, well, I'm demoralised, like we all are, of course, with the result. But I wanted to talk about a couple of things because I've also been concerned with, I guess, the lack of analysis about power. And I come from a background of having run a design agency at a high level doing corporate identities and corporate identity rollouts for a couple of decades. To give you
Love
some
that.
idea, when I develop a logo, I've got 274 points of comparison I use to compare logos. So people just see little symbols, but there's actually a great deal of depth of analysis if you're going to do it competitively. And part of the concern I had in reaching out to people in the DNC, as I had for probably 12 months beforehand, was just a misunderstanding completely of what I feel was happening in terms of the marketing on the MAGA side and in terms of their message. Because it's, look, all the things about Russian propaganda, the misinformation, and the prejudice and the rest, all of that's true, but that's not what was happening, and it's also not what progressives need to do. If we need to understand what was really happening if we're going to win, because in order to win, we have to manipulate power. Okay, it's about power, and what Trump did was a classic study in power. And if you'll allow me, I'll just give you a couple of rundowns. The DNC is still campaigning like it's 2010. Trump is running a campaign, or ran a campaign. It was actually his narrative and the way that he, if you like, conveyed that narrative, which was one of the innovative transformations of the last election. And what did he do specifically? Well, specifically what he did was, and I think the debate was really instrumental because everyone who looked at traditional politics said Kamala won the debate, right? Oh, she won it because she had the talking point. She got over the top of him. She ruffled him and so on. He came away saying he won the debate, and everyone said, "Oh, he's just saying that to gaslight us all to try to play to his base." But he did win the debate. You know why? Because for 2 weeks we were talking about cats and dogs and them being eaten. All right, that was the truth of it. He controlled the narrative for 2 weeks, and what was he really doing? He was running a TV show, and his television show was effectively a three-way combination of The Apprentice meets the World Wrestling Federation meets Jerry Springer. Okay, a reality TV show version of that. And all he had to do was release a new episode every week or two, and he would run on that episode. Now, in terms of the character that he plays, because let's be clear about this, we all know that he's smarter than he makes out, because you don't get to do what he's done if you're not smart. Okay, I'm sorry to say. Dumb people can't do what he's done. Okay, now is he a stable genius and all that? Well, this is a caricature, and what's the character that he's playing? Well, it's a combination of the baby face or the hero from World Wrestling Federation, and also the heel. But in fact, what he's really done is create a character much like Walter White in Breaking Bad. If you think about Breaking Bad, right, and Walter White, I don't know if
Yeah,
Felicia saw that.
the sympathetic villain. Yeah, I understand. Yeah,
Well, and more
he's
than
Vince
that.
McMahon.
Well, I actually think more Walter White, because Walter White did the most abhorrent things, and yet we could still feel some empathy for him because of the way that he'd come to that story. And Trump's underlying narrative, if you like, was the whole the country's not delivering for enough people. That was the good guy part of what he was putting. And so then all the villainy that he then participates in is forgiven by his base and by people who are swing voters as not being real. Oh, he's only, it's theatrical and all the rest, because in large part it is. My biggest concern about what's going to happen with MAGA isn't the extremes of MAGA, I've got to say. It's a Ronald Reagan revolution, because you know what happened last time was Reagan got in, and then 12 years later they transformed America into a neoliberal arrangement, completely taking it away from the tax arrangements that were happening from World War II to when Reagan got in. And what I'm concerned about here is that when you put people like Elon Musk in charge of things, when he can, it's quite a feat to do the things that he's done in business. Now, what happens when they deliver outcomes that actually make everyone very happy? What if they're as efficient as what the fascists were in Germany in terms of delivering things to people? What if the oligarchs actually come along with their products and services and their money and they deliver results for people on the ground and people go, I really like some of this stuff. I'm going to keep voting for it. Because, the
To our
last
society.
right? And the last time it happened, the Democrats ceded that ground and they became essentially neoliberals as well. We're just a little bit nicer. We're still going to do NAFTA. We're still going to deregulate the banks, which ended up causing the 2008 crisis when Clinton did it. We're still going to do all those things that were traditionally Republican because Reagan pushed us so far to the right. We're scared to actually fight and stand up to them. So we're going to roll over on that stuff and just be nicer.
Yeah,
Right.
John, you bring up a lot of really good points. I mean, I think that there's so many examples of how. So we can, if you since you brought, I'm going to drop you down, John. I got some other people requesting. Thanks for being here.
Can I just make one last point?
Sure.
One of the things that I think you'll see in the first 6 to 12 months is going to be
let's
Elon
land the
Musk.
plane, brother.
Elon Musk deregulating the car industry to allow automated driving for all the vehicles. And so when you've got a whole fleet of cars picking up old people, picking up kids and dropping them off without drivers, there's going to be a lot of people who get in those cars and say, that's actually a really good thing that's going on. When they do things like that, that's a real issue. We're not even talking about those sorts of potentials.
Well, thanks a lot, John, for being here today, brother. I appreciate you. He did bring up something that reminds me of like the Christian nationalism, again, back to messaging and propaganda and how it infiltrates our society. So we think about Reagan and the evangelicals. They feel like they were losing traffic. They feel like they were losing ground with their messaging. So instead of using their attempt to have Christian nationalism take over our government, they needed a target. So they used abortion rights. So they used Roe. So they've been building this resistance to Roe for 50 years because they would have never been able to sell to their electorate that our real goal is Christian nationalism. And that's the same thing that happened in Germany. It's the exact same thing. It's like we're going to try the whole Jewish thing. Oh, that didn't land well. So let's say economic recovery. Yeah, that'll work. Let's make everybody's lives better. Let's violate the Versailles Treaty every chance we can get by rearming our nation, again, violating the Versailles Treaty. And they managed to do that. Then, after the brainwashing was complete, now, since I rebuilt the society, the Jews are the enemy. They're going to take away everything that we just gave you. So everybody, right? The Jews are the enemy, right? And the electorate bought it. Same thing in America, powered by Russian propaganda. It's the brown-skinned people. It's immigrants taking your job. It's the woke media. It's the woke members of the military. It's feminists. It's the whole 9 yards. And it's, again, there's so many examples of history repeating itself, and we're living it now.
Yeah, I think Eastwood has a good perspective, an interesting perspective, but I also I think that's why we target women primarily, or that's why I think that what we have to do is this is the largest part of the electorate that is being disenfranchised. Because I do agree. I think that one of the scary things about fascism, right, is the capital, right? Because there's got to be cover for billionaires. Yeah, if they have the capital to maybe make some people's lives better, to build infrastructure, to do things, but there is a large part of the electorate that is absolutely disenfranchised. Self-driving cars are not going to change the fact that women are being unalive, that we have maternal deserts, that women can't find an OBGYN, right? Like, these are the points we have to find out. But then I think it has to be a multi-pronged approach, because I also do think, like we say in advertising, keep it simple, stupid, and that is the bottom line. We got to have messaging. We've got to keep it simple, and we've got to just appeal to the working class. Right. And that's why I like to say it so simply, like, hey, I don't care who you voted for in this conversation. All I want you to imagine is a world where, regardless of who we ever vote for, you can vote for the opposite of who I vote for all eternity, and we are still being robbed by the same people.
And we still continue to punch down. It's part of it. And then again, that's by design by this Russian propaganda machine to literally go after. We don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but it's the it's the victim blaming. It's the scapegoating. One of the tenets of fascism. We talk about that all the time. It's like you pick a marginalized community, and they are the threat. Meanwhile, your pockets are being picked,
Amen.
right?
I mean, that's literally what is happening. And sure, could life get a little better, or can it be like, look over here at all this flashy stuff? I mean, yeah, that's what Elon Musk is essentially doing. But while doing that, there are people being othered. There are people being disenfranchised. Now, one of the largest cross sections in the electorate. Like, that's the beauty of the declining birth rate. Like, actually, this is something we haven't addressed. So I'll say this because I
Go
think
for
it's
it.
important to address. Like, there are declining birth rates all across the world in the developed world. There was previously an idea in the developed world that birth rates were directly tied to the economy, meaning, hey, if families have the money, hey, Tanya, thank you for the heart. If families have enough money, they'll have as many children as they can. It's that simple. That's the reason. Family planning is tied to economics. But what we know now is, right, there are going to be the largest workforce, there's going to be more uh, uh, able-bodied workers in Africa than in the rest of the world combined by like 2040. What we've learned is economic success does not equal babies, right? Because there's a psychological component to it. If women don't believe they have a future, if women, if people don't see that they have a purpose, why are they going to bring children into this society? And because of that, and Republicans continual underestimating of, as you disenfranchise people, as they see no future, there's a psychological effect on the birth rate. And I will say this, the repeal of Roe v. Wade, and you can look this up, it has increased the birth rate in states, right? Like Texas is one of, it has increased the birth rate, but not by enough, right? So they need to disenfranchise women to have children. That's what they're trying to do. That's the crack, right? One of the largest cross sections of the electorate is now not just being othered, we're being objectified. We are no longer humans. One of my favorite Harvard studies, they showed men pictures of women they didn't know. Like, they would cycle through pictures of women men didn't know. And the part of the brain that would light up was the part that sees a thing, an object. And then they would start peppering in pictures of their women who were their cousins or their sister or their mother. And then the part of the brain would light up that says, oh, me, I recognize me, a human being, not an object, right? And that's the real problem right now, is the more that white women are othered, the more women are othered, the largest cross-section of the electorate continues to be objectified and othered. That is the biggest crack as I see it. Right. And we have to look for those cracks, and we have to get our finger in them, and we have to poke inside them. Right.
Well, wasn't it Mike Johnson who talked about that, Felice, about how he thought that, that anti-abortion legislation would help our population because then women could just become breeding factories, basically. We can repopulate, solves all of our problems. Social Security wouldn't have an issue. We'd have more workers.
Tell that to Japan. It's not working. Look,
Exactly.
I mean, it's not. And all studies, like, there are other developed countries way farther along in the decline of their birth rate than us, and it's not working. And that's where these 4B movements. I like the is it 4B 6T or 6B 4T? I think it's 6B 4T. Look it up. It was just banned in China. But yeah, I think we'll talk about it on our show tomorrow. But yeah, I think that is the crack. That's one of the main cracks. But these are the conversations we need to have. And when you have these ideas of, hey, I see a crack, I can identify a crack, a pain point in the American electorate, right? Because I do think John Eastwood's right in that he's saying there's a large cross section, and the majority of them are straight white males who, regardless of who's president, their lives aren't going to change, right? They're not going to feel the pain at this point. But there are people who are starting to, right? As they edge closer to the expendables,
Yeah.
like, they're getting very uncomfortable. And those are the opportunities. Because I agree, like, I don't think, Gen Z males, like, they're not feeling the pain, right? They're not in a position, they're not getting uncomfortable. But I do think, and I think someone in the comments keeps saying this, there is a lower middle class. Like this, that's who JD Vance appealed to, right? Hillbilly elegy.
The working
And
poor.
then we have, yeah. But the problem is we need to have a conversation about economics, right?
Right.
With them. And that's complex. So how do we simplify that conversation, right? That is another thing I think we need to look at with our messaging is the numbers are on our side, right? Joe Biden did it better than anyone else in the G7. We recovered better from the pandemic. The data story of the economy, we win unequivocally. But
No doubt.
how do you tell that story in a simple enough way? Because like we talked about at the beginning of the show, and we've kind of come full circle. This is not, America's not special. Incumbents in office in the last 4 years were displaced,
Absolutely.
right? Like it's as simple as middle class, lower middle class, people in poverty just said, I just went through hell. You can try to explain to me how the supply chain works and that the price of eggs isn't Joe Biden's fault. I don't want to hear it. I went through hell. Like I need something different. And it was that simple. So we have to come up with something very simple and straightforward that gives people hope and understanding that the future is in voting blue. You know, I could go through congressional vote records. Oh, you need these programs to survive? Well, who votes, who funds the disaster relief fund? Not the Republicans. Who funds Social Security? Votes to protect Social Security? Not the Republicans, but how do we tell that message in a simple way?
Yeah, and to your point, and Daniela said this as well, it's irrelevant. Right. It almost becomes irrelevant when you become brainwashed. Again, we've said this before. You can take somebody to the concentration camp in the middle of the USSR and it wouldn't matter. They could be standing there faced with the reality of what we just told them, and it won't matter because that's the brain RFK pun there, no pun intended. The brainwashing of the electorate based on propaganda, misinformation. And I want to get back to this piece. I know you've got a lot of stuff on your outline. I'm happy to pivot to anything you want there. But I think this is a gentleman by the name of Tim Snyder. I know you know who he is. He's the preeminent expert on Russian propaganda and misinformation. This is an interview that he did a while back on an MSNBC, and I'll just play it for you because I think it's relevant. It speaks to exactly what we're talking about how these bot farms and how the propaganda machine starts a thread, starts a misinformation, disinformation, propaganda campaign using all their various outlets, using Facebook, using social platforms, and then using talking heads that we found out recently that they've been paying. So this kind of speaks a little bit to it, and then we'll talk on the other side. Hold on. My bad.
The Republican Party. Our next guest, Yale history professor Timothy Snyder, testified about that on Wednesday in the House Oversight Committee.
If we follow Chinese propaganda about the ongoing Ukraine war, we notice a certain pattern, which is that the political warfare themes, which, as colleagues have quite rightly said, are meant to pass through us, have in fact done so. First, Ukrainians are Nazis, a Russian theme picked up by China, echoed on the House floor. Second, it's all about NATO enlargement, a Russian theme picked up by China. Third, Ukraine is corrupt, a Russian theme picked up by China, echoed on the House floor, echoed in the Senate by Senator Vance. Fourth, that democracies can't do anything about Ukraine, that it's all pointless, a Russian theme echoed by Chinese propaganda picked up in House discussions. Fifth, we should pay attention to the border and not do anything about Ukraine, a Russian theme picked up by China, echoed in both chambers. Sixth, the Biden bribe, a Russian theme picked up and echoed by China, discussed in this very chamber.
Committee member Marjorie Taylor Greene, a member of the so-called Putin wing of the Republican Party, said this.
It's amazing to me that just in a few years' time, it's now considered misinformation to talk about the Nazis in Ukraine.
I'd like to thank the representative from Georgia by making clear with her comments and with her person that any discussion of political warfare has to include Russia, Ukraine, and America. She's just demonstrated that point, I think, very powerfully.
So it's funny, the examples that he gives, right, about NATO expansion, Biden bribes the border. We should be funding the border and not the war in Ukraine. All that Russian propaganda, and then MTG, in her beach blonde, bad built butch body self, comes out and literally shares it in a hearing on the floor of Congress. J.D. Vance has referenced it. Mike Lawler, who was on the Intelligence Committee, admonished his colleagues for spreading Russian propaganda and misinformation. So this is what we're talking about, folks, right? Again, the propaganda machine, China, Russia, and other bad actors infiltrating not just the American psyche, not just the American populace and voters, but Congress. And then think about the people that are going to potentially be in Trump's cabinet. Thoughts?
Wait, can I play you a clip really quick? Because I
Please.
think you'll like this. Yeah, so this is who I absolutely love. A member of our intelligence community, Abigail Spanberger. She's a representative, I believe.
Love her.
Yeah, oh, she's a genius. This is her, let's tie this back because we should talk about the cabinet. This is her addressing that issue. This woman's a genius if you don't know her.
Then we have someone like Gabbard, who, as a sitting member of Congress, went to Syria and sat down with Bashar al-Assad shortly after he used chemical weapons against his own civilian population.
So, and I don't know, I covered this. There's a great article. There's there's articles all around. This is while we were engaged in military action against Syria. Mm-hmm. This is someone who had no business going to speak to a dictator that we were warring with, unauthorized. Mm-hmm. She showed up to talk to to one of the worst dictators currently living on earth.
Which is out of step and out of alignment with U.S. policy, first and foremost. Out of step and out of alignment with the protocols that are in place to ensure that our ambassadors and our Secretary of State and all those who work in the diplomatic realm, let alone the defense realm, are not having sort of lone actors going to a foreign country, meeting with a authoritarian dictator who uses chemical weapons on his own people, and then comes home and says, oh, if the United States would just meet with him, surely we could get this all worked out. Then Gabbard is also someone who time and time again has trafficked in conspiracy theories, has used almost word for word the propaganda put out by the Kremlin and Russian state TV. And so whatever the motivation is behind it, whether it is truly aligned with her belief system, whether she thinks it's comical to get people like me and other folks riled up worrying about her being a national security risk, whatever the motivation is, it is misaligned with U.S. interests, and it is deeply, deeply dangerous. Because if she is willing to work against U.S. interests by going to Syria and meeting with Bashar al-Assad, if she is willing to work against U.S. interests by legitimizing the Kremlin's propaganda, what sort of untold damage could she have with the title of Director of National Intelligence if she's willing to do their bidding, right? That is the role that is responsible for ensuring what is in the presidential daily brief. Is she going to put Russian propaganda in the president's daily brief and the rest of the world? What would stop her from not including it in, the information and the advice that she's giving to the president? She has a very long history of just working against U.S. interests on the international scale, and she's an unserious, unfit, terrible candidate for this role, and one that it would be deeply, deeply dangerous.
Oh, wow. Abigail Spanberger for the win. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's the reality. So, I call it, these are true loyalty tests. Understand what Trump is doing. He has chosen the most unfit people, right? These people have being in charge of 18 U.S. intelligence agencies are the deepest, darkest U.S. secrets. This woman is not unqualified; she's disqualified from
Agreed.
that. And Trump is saying this is the first loyalty test of the Republicans, right? And Marjorie Taylor Greene said it last week out of her own mouth. She said, "You can push these appointments through, or you will face Elon Musk, the most well-funded PAC in history." That they're saying to the Republicans, this is your loyalty test. You prove that you will put unqualified propagandists, conspiracy theorists, people who've undermined our national security in there. You put grapists in there. You put SAers in there, or we will force you out.
Talk about the deep state.
Yeah, drain the swamp.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. Drain
Exactly.
the swamp.
I mean, I'm glad you played that, but again, this our show today is about the influence of Russian propaganda on our electorate, and it's not just the voters, but it's now active members of Congress, it's potential appointees to cabinet positions. It's exactly coffee. It's scary, 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 scary times. There's so many other things on your outline, Felice. Is there anything else in particular that you wanted to jump into to talk about? Because everything on there is so great.
I mean, I do think the cabinet appointments are important, but
Sure.
if you just want to keep just touching on, touching on them, as some of those people like to touch on children, allegedly, we do not know. But again, I just want to say, I see this first round of appointments, right, as the most extreme. Like, this is an authoritarian dictator saying, prove your loyalty now, right? And if they will do this, they'll do anything. What won't they do at that point? Do you know what I'm saying?
That's a really good point. Everything's been about the loyalty test, right? Replacing Schedule F, replacing civil servants, the nonpartisan machine that makes a government go with loyalists. That's a Project 2025 mandate. We already learned about firing woke Democrats, whatever they are in the U.S. military, firing those people. The loyalty test now for approving these cabinet appointments. And apparently there's reporting that Mitch McConnell has come out within the last hours and said these recess appointments are not happening. I mean, he is still the Senate Majority Leader until January. So,
well, and I do think I don't think, this is my opinion, but me, I monitor like the MAGA sphere deeply and the Republican Party. That's why I'm on X all day. All I'm doing is monitoring, and I will say, Matt Gaetz, I don't think he can't get through.
no,
They are
agreed.
and I'm not talking about Democrats' opinions really don't matter at this point.
Correct.
I don't think Matt Gaetz can get through. Tulsi Gabbard would be the next one. I don't know. I think even the alleged he paid off someone who said that he raped them. Pete Hegseth, he might be able to get through, right?
Right.
Like, there's more of an appetite for